Begin today the Gemara on Daf Chavava Medalef, this first line at the top of the Yom. The Bava Basra. This is continuing from the Gemara before that brought the machlekes between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Yosi. General machlekes in this Perek, when you have neighbors and one has a tree, for example, the other has a pit. That was the case of the Mishnah. Who is the one that has the distance? Chachamim say, since the tree, the roots spread into the property where the pit is, so ala mazik, he with a tree that's mazik, he has to distance himself. Rabbi Yosi says, no, the nizik has to be marchik himself. Since the roots spread eventually, only later, so then the nizik has to move away with his pit. But the Gemara says, Rabbi Yosi is made if it's giri delay. If the damage that the mazik is doing is similar to throwing an arrow, it's a damage that comes directly from your body right away, so then you have to distance. So the Gemara here brings another incident that happened that's related to this psak halacha. So the Gemara, the Bava Basra, Brei the Ravin, the ones of Basra that were a son of Ravin. Ki have a naftzi kitna, when they would be winnowing their flax, have a ozle raksa umaske inshi. So the chaff that came out of it would fly, and it would be mazik other people. So they came to Ravina, and they thought that they can demand of this person that is, they can demand of someone that was winnowing this flax and it causes chaff to fly, that they can ask him to move away because it's like Rabbi Yosi said, you're causing immediate and direct damage from what you're doing. So Ravina said, Ravina said to them, that this that we said that according to Rabbi Yosi, because the damage you're causing is like an arrow, and therefore you have to move away. That's only in the case where it's something that's coming directly from your koyach, and there's no other koyach involved there. Here, what's making this chaff fly? It's the wind. It's not going on its own. Because it's going together with the wind, so therefore Rabbi Yosi would say that in such a case you do not have to distance. Maskefla ma baravashi, so ma baravashi asks on this from the malacha in Shabbos. Ma'ishno mizayre. One of the halachas of Shabbos is winnowing, and v'ruach mesayate. And what gets done through the winnowing is only with the help of the wind. And over there, yechayev for the malacha of zayre. So we should say the same thing over here, that it's considered to be completely your action, just like there's a malacha yechayev. Here, when the shaft flows with the wind, it should be considered your doing, and therefore you should have to remove yourself. Like Rabbi Yosi said, it's giri delay. That was his question. Now the Gemara doesn't answer this question. Omrua kamed de Mereimar. This question was said in front of Mereimar. Amalahu, and Mereimar said, Hainu zayde v'ruach mesayate. And Mereimar Taka said like this question. He agreed to the logic of this question, that it's the same. That over here, when the chaff is flying and it causes damage, it's your doing, and you have to distance yourself, like Rabbi Yosi says, and it's compared to the malacha of Zayre, where the wind helps, but it's your winnowing and it's your malacha. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Ravina that disagreed with this question. Now the Gemara doesn't even answer why is it not the same, but Rashi here quotes the answer that the Gemara gives in Bava Basra to a similar question. Over there, the Gemara says that it's different than Shabbos. What's the difference? Because by Shabbos, over there, because the action that you're doing is accomplishing the malacha, that it's winnowing, over there, malachas machshavas asra teira, that when you're doing and it gets it done, even if the wind is helping, you're going to be chayiv. But over here, though, when it comes to a money matter, though, by a money matter, it has to actually be your action. The fact that there's the wind helping, so you're not going to be chayiv for this. That's the difference. You can't compare the malacha of Shabbos, malachas machshavas, to a case where you want to obligate someone for the money damage. So now the Gemara asks, Ula Ravina, according to Ravina that holds of this distinction, Ma'ishna, why is this any different from another Mishnah that says there in Bava Basra, Migetz hayetze mitachas apatish, if there's a spark that comes out from a hammer, the hizik, and this spark flies, and it damages someone's property, the chayiv l'shalim. Over there you are chayiv to pay. So we see that the spark that flies out, even though the spark flies with the wind, you are chayiv. And over here, Ravina is saying that because the shaft flies with the wind, so you're going to be potter. Answers the Gemara, it's not the same thing. Hasam nichele de lezel. Over there, by the spark, when you're banging with your hammer, you want the spark to fly away from where you are in your house. You don't want the spark to remain in your house and cause a fire. But over here, he doesn't want this shaft to necessarily fly away. Maybe even has a use from the shaft itself. So over here, the fact that the wind takes it and it flies is not considered to be a continuation of your action, of what you want to get done with this. Okay, there's a discussion here in Taisus about this Gemara. One of the things Taisus discusses is regarding the flax, the shaft that flies. And the Gemara says, according to Ravina's opinion, that because it flies with the wind, so you putter. But why is this different than the mazik of Eish? Eish is also with fire, spreads with the wind, and there the Torah says Yechayev. That's one of the Avos Nezikin. So Torah says, by fire, you created the mazik of the fire. Elamai, the wind is carrying it. Over here, the shaft itself is just this. It's just light. This light peels. It itself is not a mazik. It only becomes a mazik because of the wind that's carrying it to a place where it damages someone's property. So therefore, in such a case, you're not going to be chayiv. A person should not plant a tree near his friend's field. So before we were discussing the previous Mishnah regarding if a tree that's being planted near someone's pit. Here the Mishnah said the shear is 25 amas, that the roots can spread and damage the walls of the pit. But if there's no pit in your friend's field, so then you have to distance your tree. How much? You have to distance only 4 amas. Echad gefanim, whether this is a vineyard and whether this is a tree. Now over here, the reason why you have to distance has nothing to do with the roots. The reason you have to distance is, as Rashi says, we'll see right away in the Gemara, it's because when you have a tree that you're planting or a vineyard that you're planting, so you need to have a machresha, you need to have space to go with a plow around these trees to be able to plow there, or even afterwards to be able to pick the fruits or the grapes from the vineyard. And if you're not going to have that space of 4 amas, you're going to end up going with your machresha into your friend's property. So therefore you can't plant all the way up to his property. However, if there's a wall, a partition between the 2 properties, so then you can plant all the way up to the border, because the wall is not going to allow you to enter into your friend's property with your machinery or your machresha. If there are roots from your tree that are going out into your friend's property, because you plant, the roots spread, as we learned before, up to 25 amas. So you're planting, let's say, 4 amas away from his property, but now you have roots from your tree that goes into his field. So then, your neighbor that wants to plant his tree, his property that is, and he's plowing there, he can go deep 3 tvachim, and he can uproot your roots that are there, so it shouldn't prevent his plow of plowing his field to be able to plant. If now your friend afterwards wants to come and dig a pit or a ditch or a maide, which is also a pit that has like a cover over it, like a cave, he can go even deeper than 3 tvachim, and he can cut off your roots to be able to dig his pit. And the wood of these roots that he cuts off belongs to him. Now it's not clear in the Mishnah who's the him. Is it the one that it's in his field now, or is it the one that it comes from his tree? The Gemara will discuss that. Tana, we learned in Abraise, Arba Meshamru. In the beginning of the Mishnah, when it says don't plant a tree or a vineyard near your friend's field, why do you have to make a space of 4 amas? For the work that you have to do with a machresha, with your machinery, that you go there, that you shouldn't enter into your friend's field. Shmuel said about this, the shear of 4 amas was only in Eretz Yisrael, where the machresha they had was that size. It was wide 4 amas. In Bavel, the machresha they used was narrower, and therefore it's only 2 amas. We learned in the Braise, don't plant a tree near your friend's property. In the Braise it says 2 amas. In our Mishnah it says 4 amas. So we must say, like Shmuel said, it depends if it's Eretz Yisrael or Bavel. Shema Bino, that's a clear daya. Others said this answer of Shmuel, that it was actually first, there was a contradiction that was asked there, and he gave this as an answer. Tanan, and our Mishnah says, you can only plant a tree if you distance 4 amas. But in Abraise we learned that you could distance 2 amas and that's enough. And Shmuel answered, Lekashe, it's not a contradiction. Kan beBavel, in Bavel the machresha is narrower 2 amas. Kan be'Eretz Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael is 4 amas. Rava Bar Chanan Havale Hana Dikli Ametzre the Pardesa de Rav Yosef. Rava Bar Chanan had palm trees that were planted on the border of the vineyard that Rav Yosef had. Birds would come, Yasvi bedikli, and they would land, they would sit on the branches of the palm tree. And the branches of the palm tree were hanging over very close or into the property of Rav Yosef. And then the Nachsi b'Pardesa, and from there, from the palm tree, they went down into the orchard, umafsidile. And they would, the orchard or the vineyard, and the birds would then ruin his vineyard. They would eat up the grapes. So Amalei, Rav Yosef says to Rav Chanan, Zilkites, you should go and cut down your palm trees that are causing this damage by the birds that are coming here. Amalei, so Rav Chanan said, that's not my problem. That is, I distanced the 4 amas that the Mishnah said. I didn't plant my tree right near your vineyard. So once I distance, the fact that the birds come is not my issue. So Amalei, Rav Yosef tells him, Hanimili li'ilonis. If you're planting your tree near someone else's property, that's a field, or a orchard, that are trees, so then 4 amas is good enough. But if you're planting your trees near someone else's vineyard, over here you have to distance more than this. For this reason, because you have these big branches that hang over, and birds can land there, and they go directly then on someone else's vineyard. But the Gemara asks, what did it say in the Mishnah? Echad gefanim ve'echad kol ilon. That when you distance 4 amas, it's whether it's a vineyard, whether it's any tree. So this is what Rav Bar Chanan is bringing from our Mishnah. The way he understood our Mishnah is not the way I read it when we learned our Mishnah. He understands that when it says Echad Gefanim, Echad Kol Ilon, it's not talking about the person that's planting a tree or an orchard, how much he has to distance. It's talking about your neighbor. What does he have in his property that you're distancing from him? And he understood the Mishnah is saying whether your neighbor has a tree, whether your neighbor has a vineyard, you don't have to distance from him more than 4 amas. So Amalei, so he answered and said, no, Hanimili ilon le ilon. Only if you're planting your tree in your property near another person that has a tree in it. Or gefanim le gefanim, your vineyard near his vineyard. Aval ilon le gefanim binan tfei. But if you have your tree in your property and you're planting it near his vineyard, then you have to distance more. So the pshat in the Mishnah is not like he thought. When it says in the Mishnah, Echad Gefanim ve'echad Kol Ilon, it meant the vineyard or the tree of the one that's planting near someone else's property. But if the other person actually has a vineyard, you do have to distance more. Amalei, so he said to him, Ano loy kayatzna. I'm not going to cut off my tree. So in other words, he agreed to what he was saying, that by the vineyards you do have to distance your tree more from the vineyard because of the issue with these birds. Some Rishonim actually add to this that even according to Rabbi Yossi, this would be considered giri delay, because what happens is when the birds land on this person's trees, so the owner of the trees comes and sends them away from his trees, and they immediately from his trees fly not to the vineyard. So it's mamish like he with his hands is sending these birds to his vineyards. So he agreed that he has to cut off his tree, it's too close to his vineyard. But nevertheless, Amalei, he said to him, I'm not ready to cut down these palm trees, because the Amarav, Hai Dikle, the Tong Kaba, a palm tree that it has in it a kav, a measurement amount of dates, also a miktzeh. You're not allowed to cut off this tree, a fruit tree. Furthermore, Rav Chanina said, L'shachiv, Shichas Bri, my son, with the name of Shichas, did not pass away, Elo de Kotzte Nasa B'loi Zimna, because he cut off a fig tree not in the right time. So therefore he says to him, to Rav Yosef, Mar, the master, Inichale, if you want, lekets. You can cut off the tree, but I don't want to cut off a fruit tree. Rav Papa, another story. Rav Papa had palm trees that were planted on the border of Rav Huna Bered Rav Yeshua's property. Azal, so now Rav Papa went and Ashkeche, he found the Havachafar Bekakoit Sheroshav, that Rav Huna Bered Rav Yeshua is digging in his property, and he's cutting off the roots of Rav Papa's trees that are going into his property. So Amalei, Rav Papa says to him, what are you doing? Why are you cutting off the roots of my tree? Amalei, so he answers him, that's what it says in the Mishnah. If you have the roots of your tree, they go into your friend's property. He's allowed to dig and he's allowed to go 3 tvachim deep and cut off the roots so that it shouldn't prevent the plowing of the machresha. Amalei, so Rav Papa says to Rav Huna Rav Yeshua, that's only in the depth of 3 tvachim. But I see that Mar Kochafar Tfei, you're digging even deeper than 3 tvachim. So why are you cutting off my roots? Amalei, so he answers him, "Ano, beiris shichin umayris kachafarna." It's because I'm digging. I'm not just plowing here to plant. I'm digging pits or the shichin mairis. So for that, as the Mishnah said, you're allowed to take off remove the roots even deeper. If not, as the Mishnah said, you can go and even deeper than 3 tvachim and cut off the roots. And the wood belongs to him, as we'll see soon in the Gemara Text. So Rav Papa says, Amri lei koli, I told him different arguments of why he shouldn't be cutting off my roots, and I couldn't convince him that I'm right, that he shouldn't be cutting off my roots. The Amri lei, until I finally told him, this that Rav Yehuda said, that Meitzer shechzika by Rab, when you have a pathway that became a place that the public passes through, and this is even in someone's private property, that people made it into a shortcut, which meaning originally they must have gotten permission or it was done right that they made this into a shortcut, but once it becomes a chazaka that they're passing through in this area, asar lekalkalei, you're not allowed to remove it, and they have that right to be able to pass through here. So what he was saying is, according to Rashi's Pshat, Rav Papa was saying that since my roots were already in your property for a while, and I have a chazakah that my roots could be here in your property, you don't have the rights to cut it off. Most Rishonim, though, disagree with Rashi's Pshat because they ask a simple question. Taisus here and other Rishonim say, how could you compare a rabbim that has a pathway of going here to the roots of a private person that goes into another person's property? And the Mishnah said that you can cut it off. So then it's a question of the whole Mishnah. How could you say such a thing? That he asked him this question.
Unless the roots were there for 3 years.
Even then, I don't know if there's any chazakah for such a thing. Could be, but all the Rishonim disagree with Rashi and say that the story here must have been that there was a pathway in that area, and that was his tiny. He saw that he began digging in that area where there was a pathway. And he had told him, why are you digging here? There's a pathway in this area. And then he brought him this statement of Rav Yehuda that a pathway, you're not allowed to destroy it. L'basa de nafak. After Rav Papa left, Rav Huna ben Rav Yeshua didn't respond to what he proved him from what Rav Yehuda said, but after he left, Omar, Rav Huna ben Rav Yeshua said, Amai loy omri lei, why didn't I tell him, Kan b'toich sheishes reyama, that here, that's only within 16 amas. If you have the roots of a tree, within the 16 amas of the roots of the tree, that is something that you say that the roots, their nourishment of the roots of a tree are only up to 16 amas. Even though the roots actually spread 25 amas, but they only take nourishment within 16 amas. Okay, so over here though, kan chutz l'sheishes riyam, and here it's out of 16 amas. In other words, what Rav Huna ben Rav Yeshua was saying is that I was only cutting off his roots out of 16 amas, and that's already a part of the roots of his tree, that his tree doesn't even get nourishment from this. So therefore I have the rights to cut this off. Before, till 16 amas, then you could say maybe there's a chazakah that I can't cut it off, but I was cutting further than that, so therefore I have the rights to cut it off. Now the Mishnah said, you can cut off all the roots even deeper when you're digging a pit, and after you cut off these roots, the eitzim, the wood of these roots, go back to him. Who's him? So Rav Yaakov Hadaiva, there's a guy is Chadaiva. So he asked the Shaila about what the Mishnah is saying. Eitzim Shalmi. Who does the wood of these roots belong to? But the one that is the Bala, the Elon, the tree, or the one that's in his field? Amalei. So he answered him, Tinisua. We learned this in the Mishnah Masechta Meila. There the Mishnah discusses a property of a hedyet, of a plain yid, that's side by side to a property of hektish. And now you have Sharshei Elon Shal Hedyet, the roots of the tree of this hedyet, this yid, habaim b'shal hektish, that are spreading into the property of hektish. So it comes from a tree of a hedyet, but it's actually in the field of hektish. So regarding these roots, loy nenin v'loy moyelin. You can't have any benefit of it, but if you do, because it's in the property of hektish. But if you do, the halacha of me'ilah does not apply here, because it comes from the roots of the tree that's from a hedyet. Says the Gemara, if you're going to say that the roots follow the status of the tree, so therefore, even though it's in the ground, in the property of hektish, but there's no me'ilah, because it goes after the status of the tree, which belongs to a hedyet. But if you say that the roots that are here have the status of the field that it's in, why are you not moil? It's in this field which is hektish. So what do you see from here? So you can answer Rabbi Yaakov Adaiva's Shaila when you get to our Mishnah that the roots that go into someone else's property, it follows the status of the tree. So shaloi here meant that it goes to the Bala Ilan. So the Gemara asks, though, from what it says there in the Sefer of that Mishnah, by Meila. So what are you going to tell me? What do you see in that Mishnah? Basi Ilan is linon, the status of the roots follows the tree. If so, Ema Sefer. In the Sefer of that Mishnah, it says the opposite case. Shal hektish, haboim shal hedyet. When you have a tree that belongs to hektish, and the roots are spreading into a property that belongs to a hedyet. There the Mishnah says the same halacha. Lo nanin, you're not allowed to have a no from it. It comes from a tree of hektish, but v'lo moilin. Because it goes into the property of hedyet, there won't be any isra, the halachas of milah, that is, won't apply. But the question is, if you're saying that you follow the status of the tree, this is a tree of hektish. Why should the isra of milah not apply over here? So we sort of have now a contradiction here in this Mishnah. Do we follow the status of the tree that it comes from, or do we follow the status of the karka that it's in? And says the Gemara, midi area, is there any comparison? The fact that you're bringing up that Mishnah, this is Rashi says, this is actually part of the question of the Amos Sefer, that based on the contradiction that we see from the Sefer, so that tells us that there must be a whole different shot there in that Mishnah, and therefore it has no connection to the Shaila here regarding who gets the wood, who's the owner of these woods, of the roots that you cut out here. There's no connection. Why? Because over there it's a whole different story. Bigidulin habain la'acher mikan askinan. There, what we're talking about is that there's the tree, and then with the tree, someone was makdish this tree. So the tree is hektish. After you were makdish it, now the roots grew and spread. So these are roots that grew after you were already makdish the tree. The kasava, the Tana of that Mishnah holds, ein me'ila begidulin, that there's no halachas of me'ila that apply when you makdish something, and after you were makdish it, it grew more of it. What grew more, there's no halach of me'ila. That's the explanation of that Mishnah. So therefore over there, in the ratio of that Mishnah, when it's a tree that belongs to a hedyet, so then obviously the roots of that tree of the hedyet, there's no milah. And even in the Sefer of the Mishnah, where it's a tree that belongs to hektish, but because the one that was makdish it, when he was makdish it, there was no roots yet, the roots that come later, there's no halacha of milah. That's what that Mishnah is saying. So it has no connection to Yaakov Hadai V'Ziboye here. Ravina Omar, however, Ravina says, like Kashya. In that Mishnah, there's no contradiction of the Reisha to the Sefer. And in other words, Ravina held that it is similar to our case. We could prove from there. And therefore he says the difference is, if it's within 16 ames of the tree, so then I say that is the part of the roots that still takes nourishment of the tree. So therefore in the Reisha of the Mishnah, it's that part of the roots that takes nourishment of the tree itself, which is shel hedyet, so there's no milah. And kan, chutz l'sheish rameh. But once it's out of Sheish Esra, so over here it doesn't take any more nourishment from the tree. So therefore, so in such a case, it's not going to be any milah. Again, in the Sefer it said shel hektish habam shel hedyet. So over there you're not going to be moil. The reason why you're not moil in the Sefer is, even though it's coming from a tree that's hektish, is because it's the part of the roots that are already further than 16 amas that are not helping the nourishment of the tree. So according to this pshat of Ravina, the Mefarshim say that you really could be paishet the boy of Yaakov Adaiva. That in our Mishnah, when you cut off the roots from your neighbor, if it's within 16 amas, it belongs to the Bala Ilan. If it's out of 16 amas, it'll belong to you, to the one that it's in his property. Okay, the next piece of Gemara is a whole hemshech in the next plot. We'll stop here.